So here's the harsh truth. Most people suck at writing online. They either post for years and fail to build an audience, or they build an audience and never make money from it. The same problem occurs, it's that their content sucks. I've written online for over 5,000 hours, attracted over 250,000 followers, made over $1 million, and I've helped over 3,000 students write as well. And in this video, I'm going to show you the 10 most common mistakes holding people back with their content. So grab yourself a cup of tea and let's dive in. So this first tip is probably the most effective if you want your writing to sound good. And the mistake is that people do not vary their sentence length. Okay. The truth is we don't see what we read, we hear it. And so if each sentence sounds the same length, it quickly becomes boring. What you want to do is aim for a blend, usually somewhere around 80% short, 10% medium, and 10% long. One of the best examples from this comes from Gary Provost. So I'm just going to read this out to you and it'll come up on the screen as well. This sentence has 5 words. Here are 5 more words. 5-word sentences are fine, but several together become monotonous. Listen to what is happening. The writing is getting boring. The sound of it drones. It's like a stuck record. The ear demands some variety. Now listen, I vary the sentence length and I create music. Music. The writing sings. It has a pleasant rhythm, a tilt, a harmony. I use short sentences and I use sentences of medium length. And sometimes when I am certain the reader is rested, I will engage him with a sentence of considerable length, a sentence that burns with energy and builds with all the impetus of a crescendo, the roll of the drums, the crash of the cymbals, sounds that say, listen to this, it is important. So write with a combination of short, medium, and long sentences. Create a sound that pleases the reader's ear. Don't just write words, write music. Now if that sounded good, this next mistake is the reason why people never really get to this point, and that is writing and editing at the same time. The truth is, when you write, you're wearing different hats, okay? And the first draft is dramatically different to the approach of the second draft. What you want to do for the first draft is get it out as fast as possible. Why? Well, Ernest Hemingway once said that the first draft of anything is shit. And the reason this happens is because you are trying to put your thoughts on paper, but your thoughts in your head are messy, scrambled, and chaotic. And when you're writing, you're trying to lay them out in order. Now, if you get into this trap of editing yourself as you write, you never really get this full overview of what you are trying to say. And so the easiest way to improve the quality of your content is time. Add 24 hours between your first and second drafts. And here's a quick tip if you want to do this well, is change your state and change your screen. So what do I mean by this? Well, if you just do something like hit the gym before you edit, or you meditate, or you go for a walk, you're going to change the way that you're feeling, which means you're going to change the way that you're reading, which will change the way that you're writing. And by changing the screen, you're going to be looking from a different angle, because the whole point of editing is to write it for your reader. And so if you think of it like this, the first draft is for you, the second draft is for them, and you want to edit it so that it's smooth. And this leads me to the third writing mistake, and it's so simple yet so overlooked, and that is not formatting your writing. Before your reader reads your piece, they make a quick assessment. They think, is this going to be worth the energy I'm about to invest into it? And so if you haven't actually formatted your writing, okay, if it looks like a massive wall of text, it can have the best information possible, but we look at it and go, I don't really have the time and energy to consume this, right? The harder it looks to read, the less it's going to get read. So what do we do here? Well, we want to optimize for white space. So if we take a look at this picture here, you can see how it's just a big block of text. It's kind of hard to read. But if we take the same sort of thing and then we edit it and we add in subheads, single sentence paragraphs, short sentences like we had before, questions to move people down the page, bullets, lists, these sort of things, you're optimizing for white space, and white space feels easier to read, and we create this slippery slide effect simply by editing our copy. And so my rule is that I very rarely go over 3 sentences per paragraph for social media, about 5 in newsletter because you can adjust that a touch more. I break up my points with subheads so people can scroll through, and then use bolded text to draw the eye towards your most important points. This takes a couple minutes during editing and it makes you so much easier to read. Now, speaking of easier to read, this leads us to our next mistake, and that is writing like a robot. This is an issue from school, okay? So I know when I was a dentist, we had to write essays every sort of 3 months or so. And whilst I enjoyed it, I didn't really realize that I was writing in the complete wrong way. I would sit there with a thesaurus for my editing, and I would take out all of my small words and replace them with bigger ones. Like, this is the complete opposite of what you want to be doing online, right? The best way to connect with people is to write simply. But academic writing, they want you to sound complex and clever, and that's only going to hold you back as a brand, because if you're hard to read, no one's going to actually act on what you say. And so what I like to do is I treat writing like a conversation with a close friend. And a really cool way to do this is during the editing phase. If we go through kind of 3 roles, we scan, and then we're the surgeon, and then we speak. Okay, so we read it, we take it apart, which is the editing phase, and then you're going to read it out loud as if you're reading it to a friend, and you're going to feel for 3 things. Fakeness, you wouldn't say it in person, don't say it on paper. Friction, if it's hard to say, it's hard to read. And so chances are that you've got the words are a bit mixed up, or there's too many commas. And then flow. If it sounds boring, if it's not really flowing well, then again, you need to vary the sentence structure. So let me show you an example. The most difficult concept in writing on the internet is reversing the improper education you received during your school period. The fundamental truth is this: recording your thoughts on a computer doesn't equate to writing in a robotic fashion. Right? Like, wow, who are you trying to impress? I would say this instead. The hardest part about writing online is undoing the shit they teach you at school. Here's the truth. Just because you write on a robot doesn't mean you should write like one. Now, before we move on to writing mistake number 5, I actually have a copywriting guide for you called the Sucks Framework, which will make it so much easier for you to get your ideas across persuasively. Content, emails, ads, sales pages. If you're looking for a quick way to get people to pay attention and pay you more money, you'll love the guide. It takes 5 minutes to read, instantly applicable, and best part, is completely free. So you can get that down below. And now let's take a look at the next mistake, and this is one from Stephen King's advice, and that is using too many adverbs. So Stephen King once said the road to hell is paved with adverbs, and the reason why they're rubbish is because they weaken your writing. We actually think we're using them to make them stronger, but generally what I have found is that when I'm editing my own work and other students' work, if I see an adverb, it's because you're not that confident in what you're saying. Okay, and so whenever I see one, there's an opportunity to make your copy stronger just with a few quick fixes. So let me show you what I mean. So let's say we have a text that says, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. This idea is really important. Normally, people will quickly use adverbs just to add strength to their writing, but rarely does it work. Instead, upgrade your writing fast by removing adverbs. Now, your writing is very powerful. So there are 8 words that we can remove from this, mostly adverbs, to make this copy so much stronger. I'm going to read them out, we'll delete them as we go, and then you'll see how much better that is. This idea is really important. This idea is important. Normally, people will quickly use adverbs just to add strength to their writing. People will use adverbs to strengthen their writing. But rarely does it work, but it doesn't work. Instead, upgrade your writing fast by removing adverbs. We can get rid of the word fast here, by the way, so it's just another idea about removing words that don't move the message on. And then finally, we have now your writing is very powerful. You could just say, make it powerful. And you can see how much more powerful that statement is compared to the original. And this leads me to the next writing mistake, and it's one that I fall victim to quite a lot, and that is saying too much. Again, a weird habit from school, we're told, oh, you have to fulfill this 3,000 word count. And so we build this habit of adding in more and more, believing that more words equals more value. There's a great saying from Blaise Pascal, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. The truth is, and that very old philosopher, but it applies now too. The internet rewards you for conciseness, okay? Brevity is king. And your mission as a writer is actually to optimize for the best word to wisdom ratio. And so you want to remove as much fluff as possible without impacting the message. So I always say that brevity is great, but not at the cost of clarity. And this, by the way, is why I will never, ever, ever post unedited work, because you will always find words that you can remove and that your audience will really respect you for it. And so I have a rule that will make you a fantastic brief writer, and it's called the 1/3 rule, right? So if you take your first draft and to get it to your second draft, you're going to remove 1/3 of the content. It's going to be quite hard. But if you're going to go down to a third draft, I want you to do it again and knock down by a third. And what happens here, because you have a target, you suddenly have a way to measure the weight of your words, and you start looking at sentences and be like, I don't think that actually needs to be in there. Or I can combine sentences and bring them together. There's probably paragraphs where you've got outside of the purpose of the post. Take it out, kill your darlings. And you can start getting into the nitty gritty and say, I'm not going to use 2 words when 1 word will do. I still do this exercise when I write my newsletter because it never fails to improve the quality of my content. And what you'll find is that by aiming for conciseness, we hit the other 2 goals, which is clarity, because the simpler you're writing, the clearer it becomes, and curiosity, because the less you're saying, the more value you have, the more it pulls people down into the page. So I actually wrote a small piece just to show how we can edit it down just by removing the words but maintaining the message. Let me read it out. Inversion is a powerful mental model. To invert is to walk backwards. It works by beginning at the end instead of beginning at the start. Inversion aims to avoid bad consequences because by avoiding them, you free up your time and effort, which ultimately leads to more capacity for good consequences. Not a bad message, there's a lot of value in there, but we can get this down to 3 sentences. Inversion is a powerful mental model, so there's the title. It works backwards, beginning at the end instead of the start. The aim is to avoid poor consequences so you can take advantage of the great ones. And speaking of taking advantage of great tips, this leads us to the writing mistake number 7, which really impacts how strong your points are coming across. And that is hedging your bets. The truth is, there is no room for a weak message in a crowded market. And so when we say hedging our bets, I'll show you some examples in a moment, but you start adding in little qualifiers for what you're saying. And particularly on social media, there's no real room for nuance, right? If you're trying to explain and please everyone as you go, you end up removing this magnetic pull behind your ideas. Instead, you want to be strong, you want to be forceful, you want to be polarizing. And so let's take a look at how this looks. Instead of saying something like, I think that writing is the best skill you can learn, I just say writing is the best skill you can learn. It's possible that people might make silly mistakes on occasion. People make silly mistakes. And if you want to build a business, you could follow this action plan to probably get good results. If you want to build a business, this is the only plan you need. Can you feel how much more authority and weight are behind these sentences? That is what people are looking for. Confidence in your writing leads to confidence in your brand. And speaking of what people are looking for, the biggest mistake in terms of connection through content is this next one, and that is not writing to one person. Here's the truth. When you write to everyone, you write to no one. And I've learned this myself because when I started writing online, I had loads of ideas to share, but I didn't know who I was sharing it to. And so I was just writing generally, like firing a machine gun and just hoping that something would stick. But what happens when you write like this is you just get stuck in the sea of noise. And instead, you want to see yourself more as a sniper bullet, right? That blasts through, really reaching the one person you can help the most. And so the simplest way to add real specificity to your content is to simply write to one person, and that's the person you can serve best, the person that you want to attract most. There's 3 kind of angles that work really well here. Number 1 is your favorite clients. So if you have someone that you already work with that you love, just write to them. Everything you say is for them, and then by extension, you'll attract people like them, and suddenly you have all these people coming in that you love to work with. Now, if you don't have an ideal client that you're already working with, then that leads me to the point of write to the person you want to attract. So build a profile of this person, and that can work out really well too. For example, I have a friend who is growing a podcast, and that's slightly different to building a coaching business or a consulting business. And so what he does is he writes to the podcast guest that he wants to attract most. The third angle is my favorite for connection, for kind of stopping overthinking, and that is to serve your shadow. When you write to yourself, your audience will become an extension of yourself, and everything you learn today becomes content for tomorrow. There's a really cool feedback loop behind it. Now, that's when we're doing the actual targeting, but it's also important, and this is a great little fix for your writing, because I see people, particularly really big brands, screw this up, is that the point of writing is a one-on-one conversation with thousands of people, but people think that they're having a conversation with thousands of people at once, right? So for example, they start an email saying something like, "Hey friends," right? And that's the fastest way to make your email not feel personal, right? And so that's why in my emails, I always use someone's first name. If you don't have that, you say something like, "Hey friend." Another one would be like, "We all know how good it feels to finish for the weekend," right? I'm like, you know how good it feels to finish for the weekend, because by the way, here's a quick tip. You is one of the most sweetest sounding words in the English language. And so when I write, I always have this cadence where if I'm talking about myself, I'll bounce it back to you, particularly for positive points. And then if it's a negative point, I don't want to be like, "You're fat because you can't stop eating." Would say like, "We struggle with our weight because we can't stop overeating, but you will get shredded if you follow this plan." Nice little trick. And another one would be, "Thanks to everyone who signed up to my email list earlier," right? No, that does not make someone feel special for taking action. You want to say, "Thank you for signing up to my email list earlier." And what's actually going on here is specificity. And so this leads me to writing mistake number 9, and that is being too general. I want you to think of writing like painting a picture in your reader's mind. When you use words and sentences and paragraphs that are vague, that are wishy-washy, that are full of generalisms, we can't visualize what you're saying. It's like having this blurry picture and people go, "I think I get what you mean," but all writing creates emotion. And if you're creating uncertainty, you have a very big problem. Instead, your job as a writer is to paint a crisp HD image so that we can teleport people into our ideas. This is important for storytelling, so you want to give specific descriptions, but also in the way that you're educating your audience, right? If you just say a general statement, it's like, I'm not quite sure if that's the case. So let's do a couple of examples. So if we were doing kind of like a descriptive storytelling, you might say, "I walked down the street and tried to avoid the rain." I don't really picture it, right? I can't feel the rain. I don't know what the street looks like, but you might say something like, "I rushed down the deserted street and pulled my hood tighter to defend against the sudden downpour of rain." Okay, so suddenly we know what we're doing. There's a bit more description. The next could be, great writing is much less about grammar and much more about rhythm. Okay, we can actually, when we start saying much more is much less, we can start adding in specific numbers. Like great writing is 93% rhythm and 7% grammar. And on that note, numbers are super important. So you wouldn't say something like, "Oh, I've helped many clients with my offer." You would say, "I've helped 47 clients achieve a 3-month transformation." And so I always use this trick when I'm building up my email list or wait list, for example. I won't say something like, "Come join people on my wait list." I'll say, "Come join the 973 people on the wait list for my book, which is coming out in 4 months." Can you feel how that specificity creates a sort of an air of authority? And this leads us to a final writing mistake, which just makes your writing so much harder and boring to read. And I'm going to give you a really cool test to make sure that you're not doing it. Passive voice. Okay, what is passive voice? Passive voice is weak and wordy, right? It ruins your flow. It makes you use so many more words than you actually need to do. And if you actually just keep an eye out for passive voice, you can really begin to sharpen your copy. So an example would be something like, "The girl was smiled at by the boy," instead of, you could just say, "The boy smiled at the girl." Now, here's a test for you then. It's called the zombie test. If you can add "and by zombies" to the sentence, it's passive. If you can't, it's active. So for example, "The world was rocked by Kieran and by zombies." Kieran rocked the world and by zombies. Kieran rocked the world is active. Okay, it sounds much more snappy than Kieran was rocked. The world was rocked by the world. And it's just a nice way to check to see if you can make it more powerful. So there are the 10 main mistakes that I see when people are writing online. And so here's a final tip for you. If you can't get feedback from someone else on your content, you can get feedback from AI, or just when you're editing yourself, pick one of these mistakes and keep an eye out for it. And you'll start to pick up on the mistakes that you make most. And then what I did and still do is I have a little document of my screw-ups, right? And I'll check that on occasion and be like, "Oh, you have this terrible habit of in your posts telling 2 stories instead of 1. And so now I notice that a lot more. You begin to build that into your automatic editing process and you can take it out again. And otherwise, I hope that you have found this useful. If you have, you would really like my framework to show what A-grade content looks like. You just need to apply these 3 steps and you'll find that everything you say will have an incredible magnetic pull. It's on the screen now for you. Catch you in a bit.